Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a book that basically put our entire sense of right and wrong on trial. Friedrich Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morality. So let's just jump right in with a huge question. Why do you believe that certain things are good and other things are evil? Most of us just kind of assume these values are set in stone, right? That they're timeless, universal truths. But what if they aren't? What if our whole moral compass is just the leftover wreckage from an ancient, brutal power struggle? That's the absolutely radical idea that Friedrich Nietzsche throws at us. He argues our morality wasn't handed down from on high. It has a very human and, frankly, a very bloody history. So, in this book from 1887, Nietzsche doesn't really act like a philosopher. He's more like a detective, a genealogist of morals, digging through the dirt of history to uncover where our values really came from. His whole project was to critique our most cherished beliefs by asking a simple but dangerous question. Where did you come from? Okay, so let's follow him on this investigation. The first big clue he stumbles upon is this massive split, a deep division in how humanity has even defined its values in the first place. And what's really wild is that his first big break in the case comes from, of all places, linguistics. He looks at the word good and realizes, wait a minute, this word didn't always mean what we think it means. In fact, for a huge stretch of history, it pointed to two totally opposite sets of ideas. And this really breaks it down. On one side, you have what he called master morality. This is the world of the powerful, the nobles. For them, good was simple. It meant strong, noble, life-affirming. Bad wasn't evil. It just meant, well, common, weak. But then, on the other side, you have the world of the oppressed. They couldn't win by the master's rules, so they did something absolutely genius. They pulled off what he calls the slave revolt in morality. They completely flipped the script. All of a sudden, the master's strength, that became evil, and their own weakness, their humility, their patience, that was rebranded as good. So what on earth could fuel such a massive, world-changing shift? Nietzsche uses a specific French word for it, ressentiment. Now, this isn't just regular old resentment. It's this deep, festering, spiteful feeling that comes from being completely powerless. You can't fight back for real. So what do? You fight back with ideas. You develop this creative, venomous hatred that poisons the very value system of the people on top. Okay, but how did they actually pull it off? This is the brilliant part. Slave morality's masterstroke was to invent the idea of a doer who exists separately from the deed. The idea that there's a you who chooses your actions. Why was this so important? Because it let them point at a powerful warrior and say, aha, you chose to be strong. You could have been weak, so you are evil for it. Nietzsche says this is just a fiction. The deed, it is everything. A bird of prey doesn't choose to be a predator, it just is. So that's the first clue. Now the plot thickens. Nietzsche's second major discovery takes him into territory we all know really, really well, our own conscience. And, of course, its dark, nagging twin, guilt. He starts with another one of his deceptively simple questions. Humans are naturally forgetful animals, so how do you make them remember? How do you breed an animal that can keep a promise? His answer is, well, it's pretty brutal. Pain. He says the only way to burn a memory into our consciousness was through immense suffering. The principle is chillingly simple. If you want someone to remember something, you have to make it hurt. And this whole process is what, according to Nietzsche, created what we now call our inner world, or our soul, what he calls the bad conscience. It happened in a few key steps. First, we were crammed together into organized society, forced into the walls of the first states. Second, all of our natural, wild, aggressive instincts, they suddenly had nowhere to go. So, third, what happens to all that energy? It gets turned inward. We start attacking ourselves. And that, step 4, is the birth of the bad conscience. It's this internal torture chamber where we punish ourselves for our own natural instincts. And here's another linguistic clue that's just mind-blowing. The German word for guilt is Schuld, but the word for debt is Schulden. They're almost the same. And that's because, originally, guilt had nothing to do with morality. Being guilty just meant you owed a debt. And punishment? It wasn't about justice. It was simply the creditor's right to compensation. And that compensation was the pleasure of getting to be cruel to the debtor. You can see how this idea of debt just snowballs over history. At first, a tribe feels it owes a debt to its founding ancestors. But as the tribe gets more powerful, that debt grows too.
It gets so huge that eventually the ancestor is transformed into a god. And then, Nietzsche argues, Christianity comes along and plays the ultimate trump card. It makes the debt infinite, unpayable, original sin. Now you're born already in debt to God, a debt you can never, ever hope to repay. And that cements this deep, unshakable feeling of guilt.
Okay, so we've got the clues, we have the slave revolt that flipped good and evil on their heads, and we have the invention of guilt through this idea of cosmic debt. But the big question in any investigation is, what's the motive? Why on earth would humanity adopt a system that seems so against life itself?
Nietzsche's answer here is profound. He says that the worst thing for a human being isn't suffering. It's suffering for no reason. We are creatures who absolutely need a purpose. We need a why. And that leads to his famous line, "Man will rather will nothingness than not will," meaning we would rather have any goal, even a self-destructive one, than have no goal at all.
And that's the perfect opening for what he calls the ascetic ideal. This idea of living a life of self-denial, poverty, humility. It seems totally backwards, right? Why would anyone choose that? Well, it took over the world for one very simple reason. It gave all that human suffering a meaning. It didn't get rid of the pain, but it gave it a point. It explained it. And this ideal was like a Swiss Army knife. It worked for almost everyone. An artist could use it to justify their outsider status. A philosopher could use it as a kind of shield, giving them the peace and quiet for deep thoughts. But for the ascetic priest, it was the ultimate power play, the perfect tool for controlling the masses. Here's the priest's genius move. He took all that simmering resentment from the suffering people, and he redirected it. He told them, hey, your problem isn't your masters. The problem is you. You are the sinner. Your suffering is your own fault, a punishment for your sin. And just like that, their pain had a meaning. And even better for the priest, it kept them from ever revolting.
So after all that, what's the final verdict on Nietzsche's investigation? Why does this dark historical detective story still get under our skins so much today? Why is it still so important?
Well, for one, he gave us a brand new way to do history, the genealogical method, this idea of digging up the messy, uncomfortable origins of our most cherished concepts. Thinkers like Michel Foucault ran with this and applied it to everything. He also saw where our will to truth was headed, that our relentless search for truth would eventually cause us to question the value of truth itself. Sound familiar? And you can even see his work as a really early crack at understanding ethics from a kind of Darwinian perspective.
Look, Nietzsche doesn't wrap this all up with a nice, neat bow. He leaves us with a question that is both terrifying and, just maybe, liberating. If he's right, if our ideas of good and evil aren't cosmic truths but human inventions forged in power struggles, then what's next? What values will we create for the future?